All right, welcome to Veritas Live, everyone. I am your host, Demetrius Malbro, and on this episode of Veritas Live, we dive into some of the best practices that you can follow to keep your generative AI data secure, including the infrastructure that it runs on. Now, we are joined by two of our best experts on that subject to provide their own unique perspectives on the best way to approach both opportunities and also challenges of securing your sensitive generative AI. And also to help field all of the questions, we have our community manager, Ben Spickert. I'm sure you might be familiar with Ben, and he's going to be engaging with you in the chat window. So please don't be shy, type your questions in the chat window, or maybe even type a nice hi or what's up in the chat window. So my favorite part of live is the chat window, and also to figure out and to see where everyone is watching from all over the world. So type that into the chat window right now as well. I'd love to see where you are tuning in from. I'd also like to now introduce our special guest. We have John Hink, who is the product director of Veritas Alta. John, say hello.
Hello. Hey, really excited to talk to everyone.
And we also have Varun Grover, who is a data resiliency and AI expert. How you doing, Varun?
Great to be here, Demetrius. Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's go ahead and kick things off. Let's start off with, how are you using ChatGPT in your personal life, Varun? Since you're so eager to answer that question, I can just tell.
I've been experimenting with ChatGPT for a number of things, but a really funny example was when my wife and I had it create an itinerary for us for Alaska, and we had a short amount of time. So it ended up giving us the most ambitious itinerary ever. We flew in at midnight, drove 8 hours the next day, and then caught a 6 a.m. train the following day. So the entire time we were in Alaska, we were on some mode of transport because we trusted ChatGPT fully. So I learned my lesson after that to edit its responses and use it for what it is.
Well, you just blindly follow ChatGPT, Varun? Come on.
First time in Alaska, man.
It's Alaska, right? What can go wrong? All right, John, what about you?
So, I mean, I use it for all sorts of things. I use it for, it's like whenever I want to collate things or reorganize things. But I think I like to go back to like probably one of the first things I used it for was I had a friend who was moving from a very warm place to a very cold place. And they asked me, because I'm from Minnesota, they said, what kind of snowblower should I get? And I, of course, had my recommendations, but I was like, that's like something I could ask ChatGPT. So I did, and it gave me this great breakdown of, for this year, what are the best snowblowers and stuff like that. But then to just spice it up, I went back to it and I said, please restate all that, but in the style of Werner Herzog. So it was very bleak and dystopian sort of statement, but it was really kind of funny. And so I found that I use it for all sorts of things, but I also like to change the flow and the style and stuff like that to liven things up and get people's attention.
All right, nice. So I'm just glad I don't live where you live, because I hate the cold. All right. So let's get into the topics here. So let's talk a little bit about how the landscape of data security has evolved with the advent of generative AI, and also what are some of the unique challenges that are presented to businesses as a result? And Varun, you want to lead us off on that question?
Absolutely. So in my mind, Demetrius, generative AI is one of the most transformative technologies of our generation, and it's having an impact on everything, and data security is no different. And I would say that with any great technology, with great power comes great responsibility. So you need to think through the unique challenges as well as the opportunities, and then balance the two. So yes, there's a ton of complexity, particularly around tracking and securing AI data. AI data today comes in different flavors. There's a ton of training data that's used in the inputs, and then once the model is created, that's your output, and then you can use that for inference. And so in those different workloads, it's really important to understand how to secure that entire infrastructure. And with the growth and the value, the volume and the vulnerability of data, that does create new opportunities for businesses around data management, but it also creates new challenges from a cyber resiliency perspective. And then your staff and your scales are trying to keep up, trying to use new tools, but it's definitely not happening at the pace of change. I mean, just look at the past year. We've seen the amount of interest around generative AI explode and the data around it grow exponentially as well. So definitely a data management gap that is starting to come up.
Yeah, and the biggest thing you have to think about then too is AI is this really useful tool. It's your trusted advisor, it's your buddy, it's your helper. It does all sorts of great things for us, and it's going to become more and more integral to that. It's going to be that thing that makes our lives easier. But it depends on a lot of data, and it produces a lot of data, right? So you have your intellectual property going in, you have intellectual property coming out, and you really got to think about how do you protect that data. And so you need to think about how do not only do I think about the output, but the input, and I have to secure that information. I have to not only secure it so that it can't be messed with, I have to be able to track the activity and protect that with copy. So if that any of those data sources get damaged, then as a business, you're in big risk, especially as you become more and more dependent on AI. That's not going to be stuff that someone can just throw together, and recreate very easily. It's going to take years to regenerate. So you want to make sure that you have the appropriate protection, security, and governance around that.
Yeah, it's just so huge right now. We keep seeing headlines every day around different cyber attacks and breaches, and it's almost like watching a soap opera. So we definitely want to make sure that we can continue to protect our environments. And I also appreciate everyone typing into the chat window. I see that we always have India in the house here, and looks like brand new for me is Saudi Arabia. So thank you for tuning in from Saudi Arabia. And if there's anyone else that cared to type in the chat window, please do so. I love to see where you're from. And also don't be shy if you have any questions for Varun or John. All right, so I am also curious, gentlemen, about the role that employees, so what role do employees and also internal training play in safeguarding against, let's say, the leakage of sensitive data through generative AI tools?
So in my mind, Demetrius, I think businesses need to be really proactive about this. And it's about thinking of course, about the traditional ID security requirements, but also thinking specifically about what AI security entails. So really getting into understanding how AI models work, recognizing some of the threats around those. Very recently, there's been a lot of research around some of the key threats, such as data poisoning, data leakage, and prompt injection. So there's a lot of opportunities for bad actors to tamper with the training data and actually the model once it's been deployed. And I think it's really important for employees and security professionals to be able to understand what those different vulnerabilities are and then plan accordingly. And so there's almost a need for a reskilling revolution, if you will, across both data security and AI to be able to prepare effectively for what's to come.
Yeah, and it's really one thing that at Veritas we notice is there's a lot of risk that comes up here with this information, because we talk about training things, training people's behavior and training activity and whatnot. But what you really think about is it's easy to say that to people, but for someone to actually implement that, for someone to figure out how to get that done is hard. So we focused a lot on putting things into our product, putting even some AI capabilities into our product that are really built around analyzing activities and behaviors so that we can help you find these things before they become a problem. And that allows you to get that assurance and get that activity, get that intelligence applied to what you're doing without having to, figure out how to make it sure that happens on your own.
That's a great point, John. And it's a matter of using some of these tools and technologies to augment your own capabilities. So, of course, employees can train themselves, can upskill themselves, and can learn. But it's our responsibility as technology providers to then enable them to do some of these things in a more secure and automated fashion, and help them as they navigate some of these challenges around AI. So there's a huge opportunity from a skills plus a tools perspective.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it looks like I just love seeing these different countries here. So Canada, Arizona, Switzerland, Germany, South Africa, Nigeria. Thank you for tuning in. We really appreciate that. And Varun and John, just make sure you are ready for the questions that I know they're going to type into the chat window, because no one is shy out there. Or maybe even go to Chat GPT, type something in Chat GPT, and ask Chat GPT to give you a question to ask us, and let us know in the chat window as well. So that would be really cool if you did that. Let's roll on and talk about something that I love talking about, and that is protecting sensitive data. And what specific steps can organizations take to protect sensitive data? And I'm talking types like source code, internal business information, and PII, especially when using generative AI tools. Varun.
So, Demetrius, in my mind, again, I feel like there's a lot of there are a lot of hurdles when it comes to enterprise grade adoption, but one of the biggest ones is protecting sensitive data, especially when you're in a regulated industry. So it's really important to navigate this subject and to provide some context here around what works and what doesn't work, and to really think about this as a data security community. And ultimately, it does come down to some of the fundamentals as well, like role-based access control, identity and access management. Those need to be stepped up to be able to navigate some of the unique challenges that are emerging around AI, especially let's say you start to use some of these large language models and you gave them access to sensitive data for training or fine-tuning or model augmentation. You want to be really careful about who has access to that model, because you're essentially giving them a window into all of your proprietary data or your sensitive data. And so I think it really re-emphasizes the need to have a data security posture across the organization that is really robust in my mind.
Yeah, and it's gonna be a big task for a lot of vendors or people as they start to use AI more. You're gonna have to really work with your teams and your tools to make sure that they're modernized, they're using the improved thinking and the approaches that make best sense for this. And this means that sometimes people have to think that we have to limit who has input, right? Or who can read this information. And especially building tools that are going to also be built to understand that they're working with AI, and training people to understand that they're working with that AI, because there are, like you said at the beginning, right? You do have to have some critical thinking. There's a lot of skills that people, when they're working with this technology, are going to have to really apply that people classically haven't always done, because they've been like, these are the numbers I got. That's what it means. And there is going to be this new world of, these are the numbers I got. I think these are useful, but let's double check them. So there's a lot of practices that people are going to have to really get used to and change in that space.
Interesting. And I am just really surprised I don't have any questions in the chat window. But I guess let's keep rolling here and talk a little bit about some of the infrastructure security, because there's a lot of different types of components that fit into artificial intelligence and GPUs and chips and a lot of different types of infrastructure. But what are some of the best practices for securing the infrastructure that powers generative AI?
So one of the biggest infrastructure components is the data center. And you see a lot of news around how different organizations are investing in getting some of these data center GPUs to make AI happen. And so physical security of these data centers is one of the number one things that anybody should be thinking about. Then comes network security. And then I think one of the things that we can really help with is the software side, where you need to think about vulnerabilities when it comes to that. So I think there needs to be a holistic approach to infrastructure security here, and you need to really think about end-to-end encryption to make sure that every part of the cycle is protected.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a big thing we focused on lately, right? Is we've had this we have this today. We have a lot of kind of intelligent activities, or these activities that you're using intelligence to look into what's going on with your activity, with your say your backup jobs, or as you're pulling data in, built around this idea that we have to ensure things like, there's all these things to check for, like, is there encryption? Are we meeting these requirements? Are the best practices being followed? And then you extend that to scenarios where you want to maybe inline be able to analyze activity, or post job, or on a remote copy or an isolated copy, be able to go in and analyze the data and look for issues that might be there, and do discoveries. So we have a lot of ways to look at that, discover, classify that information, and then really provide actionable insights on what's going on with that data.
Yeah, so we want to definitely implement what is called defense in depth, right? So making sure each aspect is covered. Varun, I loved your response. You mentioned the physical security and then also the software as well. John, you also added on making sure that you have backups and that the backup also has some type of AI driven power detection and monitoring on the back end for anomalies, et cetera, as well. So I appreciate that response. And it looks like we have a question here from Marlon. Nice name there, Marlon. So how is AI security integrated into the IRE? Luckily, I know exactly what IRE stands for, but maybe John, can you answer that question for us?
Yeah, and I was talking about that a little bit is already is when you have an isolated environment, what you're really setting up is something that I want to be able to have data go in, but not come out. I don't want anyone else to be able to go in. So you're created an environment where this environment can only pull data into it, and it essentially is completely isolated. So no bad actors can get in there. What you have to do from an AI security perspective is constantly revalidate that, reevaluate that, and see that is the information looking persistent? Is it looking the way that we predict that things should look? So that's really where that comes into the most play. Is looking for, it's essentially a lot of times the best use of AI in these scenarios is trying to replace that person who would be looking at activity or looking at behaviors and all the time looking for a red flag or something like that and be like, oh, I found a problem. AI is really great for doing those things that are kind of almost like routine tasks that we all do. And this is a great way for us to allow people to assign that to this service that would take care of that for you, and then just let you know if there's a problem. That lets you get back to doing the things that really require you using your brain to solve problems.
All right, nice. And another question. I appreciate everyone typing into the chat window there from Niraj. How do we secure the interaction with ChatGPT to safeguard organizations' IP? Well, that's a hot one. Shall I repeat it?
Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, happy to take a pass at it. So I think when ChatGPT first came on the scene, everybody was excited to start using it. I think what we found out pretty quickly was unless you specify otherwise, your interactions with ChatGPT are being used to train the base model. So I think one of the biggest things that you can do is be really careful about the data or the information that you put in there. It should really be devoid of any personally identifiable information, sensitive information or data tied to your organization or anything proprietary for that matter. It's innocuous to have baseline conversations, but then as you start to give it more and more information that is tied to your personal or professional life, that's when you're risking data leakage, because these bad actors are getting really smart about how to exploit some of those vulnerabilities. But as we start to trust AI as a companion or start to have some of those conversations that we probably should think twice about. So I think that's the number one thing. And then, of course, think about the enterprise grade equivalents, where if you want to use your proprietary data, if you want to use sensitive data, then there are enterprise grade versions of AI that you can experiment with that prevent data leakage, and where the conversations you have are not being used to train the broader model that is available to the public. So just something to keep in mind and really think critically about how AI is being used, going back to, as John was saying, critical thinking is the number one thing you should be thinking about when it comes to AI.
Yeah, that's actually, to add on to that one, as I always tell people with ChatGPT, because it is kind of open, you're sending information to someone, right? And I always think of it as ask it questions that you would ask like somebody at a store or something like that. Like that's the sort of thing. Like I want information about this. I want this. I want an outcome. What you don't want to do is be like, here's all my source code. Tell me if it's good, right? You don't want to give out too much information. You don't want to overshare with ChatGPT.
Well said.
Yeah, so if it's not public information, right? If it's already public information, like it's a white paper that's already out there, anything that's already published, I would say it's fair game, right? To paste into that window. But if it's something internal that has yet to be released, roadmap items, I mean, you really want to use your common sense here and don't get too excited about, oh, ChatGPT is here to solve and answer all of my questions and to, solve world hunger and things like that. But just, be really smart about that. And it looks like we have another question. Maybe we could squeeze this question in. Let's see. Sairam, is it possible to control or manage how the machine learning and large language model can evolve? Varun.
That's a great question. I think what's really interesting about some of these large language models is the increases in accuracy are coming from the increases in data and compute, while the model architecture, which is largely based off of something called the transformer neural network, is staying the same. So what you're seeing is just by adding more data and adding more GPUs, you see a huge increase in the performance year over year. GPT 3.5 to GPT 4 was a great example. So I think the short answer to that is as long as you're working with the transformer neural network as the baseline architecture here, as you start to add more data and you start to add more compute, you will potentially continue to see advances in how this model performs and its capabilities. But the one thing I would say is the real opportunity that we're starting to see is building on top of these foundational models. They're building applications on top of these foundational models. Very few organizations actually need to go out there and train their own large language model, because that only makes sense if it's commercially viable for you as a business to then use your large language model to sell to other businesses, or to have it as an open source opportunity. But what is really interesting is if you can take an existing model, fine tune it or augment it for your specific use case. And I think there's going to be a lot of interesting applications starting to emerge in the next year, and that we're already starting to see some of that. So yes, you can control a little bit of it, but I think it's using what's already been built and building on top of that for specific use cases and specific applications. And you have some of the key AI players innovating in terms of advancing these large language models. And on the other hand, you're seeing advancements in small language models as well. So lots of interesting developments in this space. And right now, I would say there are huge barriers to entry in building your own model. So there's a lot more room for opportunity in using what's already been built and building on top of it.
Okay, let's roll into some closing remarks. And Varun, I appreciate you answering that question. It was very thorough. And no one talks about small language models, right? I'm not even sure if I even know if that existed or not, because everyone's always talking about LLMs and large language models. But closing remarks from you, John.
So the best things to think about here is that AI is a very useful tool. It's very functional. It's growing day by day. It's evolving. It's always something that's, like I always say, is treated like a helper, not an authority, because you do have to apply critical thinking to it, like Varun said. But the biggest thing is to remember that it's a service you're using. It's an application you're using. It has its data that needs to be protected and secured. And the biggest suggestion I'd say is that, look at those models for how you protect that. Don't try, like you're saying, don't try to figure it out on your own. There's a lot of things that, like, for example, Veritas can do to help you secure that information. And the biggest, probably the last thing I'd say is that as you use and work with AI, is focus on using your knowledge, using it to extend your knowledge, and to really help yourself to provide the best results for whatever effort you're trying to do.
All right, thanks, John. And Varun, go ahead and tie this in a nice bow for us.
Absolutely. So for me, I've seen a lot of folks try to learn about AI, and I think it's natural to get some degree of imposter syndrome. My recommendation would be just get going. Start with watching one video, or talking to someone who's an expert in this, and really getting your feet wet in this space, because it's here it's going to be here for a long time, and it's going to have an impact on a number of things in your life. And the last thing that I would think about is, as you think about your AI strategy, data still needs to be top of mind, because your AI strategy is as good as your data management strategy. So continue to think about how you can protect, secure, and govern your data, and think of Veritas when you do that.
All right, and Varun, you mentioned the video, but I wanted to let everyone know who's tuned in right now, and also everyone who will be watching the recording later, to check out our artificial intelligence playlist. And it is on the Veritas YouTube channel. A lot of great information there. So please take some time out to go and watch some of those informative videos on YouTube. So Also as well, Varun has also wrote an excellent blog post on AI in 2024 and the 10 predictions that are shaping our future. So go to veritas.com, check that out as well. An excellent blog post as well from Varun there. And I a little sad that I have to leave you, but I have to go, and we'll catch you next time on the next episode of Veritas Live. So until then, everyone stay secure and back up often.